Hi, Mickey.
Hey, Bob.
How you doing?
I'm doing okay.
Good.
We had the LA Book Fair in town.
Did you buy any books?
Various luminaries were visiting.
Oh, so you just went to look at the stars?
I did.
Who'd you see?
I saw your old buddy Jeffrey Goldberg.
Let's don't get into that, Mickey.
Well, I actually went into a tirade at a friend who was palling around with Jeffrey Goldberg, but who attacks me for my friendship with Ann Coulter. And it seems to me that, Goldberg basically played on the Holocaust card to trigger a disastrous war with Iraq. That did a whole lot more damage than anything Ann Coulter's ever done, yet everybody pals around with Jeffrey Goldberg because he's a good guy and a nice guy, and he reviews The Sopranos for Slate. Yet Coulter is a pariah. I thought that was somewhat unfair.
Well, as you know, I agree. I mean, there's a backstory. Oh, do we really want to get into this?
No, but
we don't. But I would say, as long as don't get into the explanation of why I have a grudge against Jeff Goldberg.
Right.
Let me just continue speaking as if I didn't, and say one more thing, which is what you're referring to is actually not his most momentous act in terms of getting us into the Iraq War. He wrote a piece for the New Yorker providing evidence of an Al-Qaeda Iraq link. That got a lot of play on NPR, on Slate, and so on. And because it was in the liberal New Yorker, it was taken seriously, as I recall.
Yeah, but I bet if you went and looked at that piece, it would hold up because its reporting was sort of accurate. I will post a link to his famous piece on aflatoxin in Slate, which I went back and read, and let's just say it does not stand the test of time.
Well, the thing is, I think the piece itself in the New Yorker, what happened was, as I recall, he went to Kurdistan, and then the Kurds took him to this prison and said, these are like Al-Qaeda guys, or something like this. And he said, okay, and I think the piece itself was nuanced. Like it said, now, of course, obviously these Kurds have their axe to grind, and I was in their hands, and I had no... But in the publicity onslaught following that, like his NPR interview and so on, a bit of the nuance was lost. This was a really significant thing.
Well, but there were Al-Qaeda guys in northern Iraq, and the argument is that we could have taken them out without starting a war, not that they weren't there.
Actually, I'm not aware of any evidence that there were actual Al-Qaeda guys there. Are you?
Oh, I thought it was clear that there's this group Ansar al-Islam that is associated with Al-Qaeda.
Those guys are not Al-Qaeda guys. They were not. And the guys who are now called Al-Qaeda in Iraq were not Al-Qaeda guys. That affiliation is definitely after the invasion.
I thought there was somebody who took refuge with Ansar al-Islam.
Well, Ansar al-Islam were guys, we were not enthusiastic about. We killed a bunch of them right away. But anyway,
enough beating on a guy who's not here.
I'm kind of enjoying it.
Having endured a 2-on-0 attack from Ezra Klein and Will Wilkinson, I think, it's very unfair.
It is unfair. Can I briefly tell you why I'm in a good mood?
Okay.
We've got this redesign of the site that will show up sometime in June, we settled on a designer and everything, but you never know for sure whether you've chosen, the right designer. And I talked, about kinds of things I'd like, and had given him the usual list of totally irreconcilable objectives, irreverent yet sober, loud yet soft, and so on. And then, so after some of that, he sent me a link to a site and said, I think this is a good example of a site that kind of reconciles some of the blah, blah, blah. It was with great apprehension that I clicked on it, but I really liked it, and that happened late last night, and I'm still feeling kind of high on that experience.
What site did he link to?
It was an obscure site. I don't even remember the name. It was, and that's another good sign. He knows obscure sites. But I'm feeling so good about that you cannot drag me down, Mickey.
But you don't want to publicize this good site by mentioning its name on Blogging Heads?
It had an odd name that I truly don't remember.
A likely story.
Also, I want to keep them in the dark. I don't want to give them any clues as to what our site is going to look like.
You just don't want our competitors to know. Okay, I respect that.
So anyway, good luck getting under my skin this time, buddy. I'm in a good mood. I will not lose my cool. I will not grow despondent over your resistance to enlightenment. Nothing like that.
What about my pleas? Did you bribe me into doing this weekly by offering me money?
Well, Mickey.
Under the table.
Mickey.
You don't have to tell the other people. Just give it to me under the table.
Mickey, you know that's not the issue. Do we need to get into all this? You know money is in fact not the issue, right?
I
am stammering because I'm on the defensive. But speaking of that, you know, we had a commenter, Otto, I think, who asked, what do we need to do to get Mickey to appear every week? Is there a dollar sum? Mickey, if it is about the money, we could have a Mickey's tip jar on the site. And every time the amount reaches some increment, like a couple of hundred, you agree to do it like an additional week per month? What do you think of that?
I think I'll take more than a couple of hundred. But money is, there is a price at which I'll do it every week, Bob. And you just haven't found it yet, that's all.
Mickey, you forswore in print on your blog any financial interest in this, and that's the only reason.
Well, no, if you paid me for each appearance, that's not a conflict of interest. It's a conflict of interest if I constantly plug blogging heads on my site and I have an ownership interest in blogging heads. That felt greasy to me.
Oh,
so
I see.
gave up my ownership interest. But if it's sort of obvious, if you go on TV and you're paid to go on TV, you can plug that. You don't get any extra money for plugging it.
You actually are definitely forgetting a conversation we had, Mickey. But if that's your current position, that's fine.
I sense I'm starting to get under your skin, so I consider
this is a perfect example of your failing to. I am like a picture of calm.
Okay, well, the process by which Bob reinvents capitalism will be interesting to watch.
There will be more on that. But meanwhile, are you saying you don't want the tip jar?
Let me think about the tip jar.
We'll see how much enthusiasm there is for this.
Well, the amounts you mentioned didn't have enough zeros on them. That was the problem.
Wow.
So
you really are too good for our viewers. Is that your position?
It's my high rolling lifestyle out here. I need to support it.
Okay.
No, I need a life, and doing it every week, I didn't have a life. So there.
Okay.
But I do keep running into people who are Blogging Heads fans.
I've actually been recognized a couple times.
And this is a positive reinforcement.
Yeah, no. You can feel the momentum building.
I tell them they're part of a select group, but I'm not even sure of that anymore.
Less and less.
So I think we decided to get my speculation about Hillary Clinton and Al Gore.
Yeah, you floated this really kind of ill-formed theory that Hillary wanted to get Al Gore into the race, and the basis. Well, go ahead. What was the basis for it?
Well, that's blogging, Bob. You float ill-formed theories, and then your readers give them shape and substance.
Yeah, well, in this case, your reader stepped in and actually gave a much more plausible interpretation of the evidence. But your initial interpretation.
Okay, here's what happened. Bill Clinton's been running around the country saying, "Well, gee, Al Gore might get in the race," and virtually nobody who responded to my post thought that this was an accident. There's something, Clinton doesn't say things by accident. There was some reason why it was in Hillary's interest to have speculation about Gore getting in the race. I immediately went to the conclusion that Hillary actually wants Al Gore in the race, because if Al Gore's in the race, that dilutes the Obama vote, and in general it dilutes the anti-Hillary vote, and maybe she was hoping to sneak by with a plurality. In other words, John Kerry won Iowa with only 37.5% of the vote. That was enough to set him on the way to the nomination. Hillary now realizes there's a big ceiling on her vote, a very low ceiling on her vote, actually, of about 50% of the people can't stand her. So the best she could hope for is about 50%. So her only hope is diluting the field against her, and that's what a Gore entry would do. And this effect is amplified by the fact that if you win Iowa, then immediately there's this huge primary on February 5th, which chooses about half the delegates. And if I thought that if Hillary won 30%, a plurality of 30% on both those dates, she would be on her way to the nomination. This emailer, who you refer to, pointed out that that's not quite enough. That if there's a crowded field, 30% is 30%. And that's not a majority, and if it leads to a brokered convention, Hillary is unlikely to win a brokered convention.
Well, there are other problems with your theory.
Okay, what are they?
Well, one is the idea that Bill Clinton thinks that by talking about this, he could actually make it more likely to happen. I would think, given the alleged antipathy between Gore and Clinton, you would think, if anything, if Clinton started predicting it, Gore would grow determined to prove him wrong. And in any event, I just don't, why would this make it especially... It's true that sometimes you start talking about things and it generates buzz, but I think basically Gore's on his own clock.
The media buzz would encourage people to encourage Gore.
Oh, Gore's gotten plenty of encouragement. The other thing is, I think there is a plausible interpretation of the evidence, which is what one of your readers happened upon, but the other problem is, I think... I just don't think Hillary's smart to want Gore in the race. I think Obama, is a guy who could, in principle, vanish because of how quickly he's appeared on the scene, kind of do a Howard Dean number, It seems to me that the more suddenly they emerge, the more it's the case that if they start losing momentum, the bottom may drop out. Whereas Gore, he's a much better known quantity, and he has the whole history of having won the popular vote in a presidential election. It's not like he's going to show up and 2 weeks later, if he doesn't have enough momentum, he drops out. If he's in for the duration. So I think she would be unwise to want him to kind of replace Obama as her threat. In any event, I think the plausible theory, which one of your readers generated, is that Clinton wants to create the speculation that Gore may enter just to freeze would-be Obama supporters who would view both Obama and Gore as preferable to Hillary, but would view Gore as preferable to Obama, so that, rather than rush in and impart further momentum to Obama, they cool their heels waiting for Gore to appear. I think that's what Clinton is doing.
The argument would be that it's a money thing, it freezes donors and some activists who might go to Obama into waiting around for Gore, and that deprives Obama of some momentum. That seems like a second-order play. Hillary may well be obsessed with money, and they may well decide at this stage the important thing is stopping money from going to Obama.
It's not just money. It's pundits. It's everyone who's going to kind of semi-officially throw in their lot with Obama.
God, it's hard to believe that there are that many pundits who haven't already thrown in their lot with Obama. But, I guess that's plausible. And it is also true that what Hillary has to worry about is an Obama-Gore alliance, which would be quite powerful.
A Gore-Obama ticket, I've long said, would be powerful.
Right. I even had speculation from one of my emails about an Obama-Gore ticket. In other words, Gore as Dick Cheney.
There's no way Gore accepts number 2 on a ticket, Mickey.
Yeah, I guess that's right. But your profound...
The guy has won a presidential election already. Come on.
Well, but it was also a low risk thing. If he could always, he wouldn't be really responsible for the administration. He could bolt at any time, so that sort of might have appeal.
Been there, done that, man.
Yeah, okay.
8 years of it.
Wait, we were talking about the Gore-Obama peril, and that's certainly true in a brokered convention situation. The other interesting thing is it does seem to me there's a much greater chance of a brokered convention this time, precisely because the February 5th primary is so big that if that thing fractures into a nobody wins 50% situation, it's sort of hard to avoid a brokered convention after that even. So if we get 4 candidates each getting 20% of the vote, 20% of the delegates, and half the delegates are already chosen, it's much, much harder for one of them to get 50%. Previously, candidates have always gotten 50% because the primaries have been a killing ground, and as the primaries go on, people drop out until it's one-on-one, and then the winner wins. But the primaries may not be able to function as a killing ground anymore because everybody might be in the pool when the big February 5th primary, comes around. So, everybody always hopes for a broker convention. The pros now dismiss this out of hand as it'll never happen. We've been hoping for that for 40 years. So just when the pros dismiss it is when it's likely to occur.
Okay, I've got a Gore-related riff that's going to masterfully transition us into the next topic.
I'm on tenterhooks. Lay it on me.
Okay, I've always kind of liked the idea of a Gore candidacy because I thought he was kind of psychologically determined now to be the anti-Bush, ideologically, which I think is exactly what the world needs. But here's a question, Marty Peretz is obviously in favor of Gore.
Well, that's not what Eli Lake said. Eli Lake said Gore would have invaded Iraq, too.
Well, first of all...
Because he listens to people like Marty Peretz.
Well, first of all, I'm talking about the Gore after what did actually happen in the 2000 election. I'm saying
you're right.
He has become determined to be the anti-Bush.
Okay, carry on.
Okay. My question is, look, Marty Peretz favors Gore. If I favor Gore, one of us is seriously confused, right? Because Marty and I both emphasize foreign policy, and we disagree pretty considerably about it. So first of all, something's wrong, right?
Not completely necessarily. Gore might gravitate toward an Edward Luttwak benign neglect of the Middle East.
Well, you're one topic ahead of us. That's a gratuitous segue.
It is. We'll avoid that. Okay.
We'll get back to Luttwak. My segue is it? Do you think it's the case that Marty Peretz's emphatic endorsement of Gore would make it hard for Gore to get enthusiastic backing in the netroots, which he might otherwise get?
I don't think Marty Peretz is that important. It is true that if you read
I think he's a little bit of a bête noire in that realm.
It would be worse if Joe Klein endorsed Gore, I think.
That's an interesting fact. Well, that does get us into the next. I mean, I'm not sure it's true, but it's an interesting...
The debate on the net roots, and Marty has been saying nice things about Obama, according to some of the stuff I've read.
Yes, no, he has. He likes a Gore-Obama ticket, and he seems to like Obama independent of that.
Well, so do we.
Again, one of us is confused, either me or him.
Well, no, you could just be agreeing to fight it out on a later date, right?
Well, I mean, to the extent that we're trying to fathom what Obama's foreign policy would be, one of us is wrong if we both have hopes.
That could be. It is true that if you read the debate on the net roots, and there was a long article by Jonathan Chait in the New Republic. I mean, really long.
So long it almost made you wish they were a weekly again, right? You shouldn't give people 2 weeks to write pieces.
I actually don't agree with that, but
no, it wasn't. It didn't read long, as they say.
It was quite well done, and one of the things that strikes you is the extent to which the New Republic is sort of all important in the world of the netroots as something they react against.
John said that in the piece.
Yes, and that the New Republic sort of hijacked neoliberalism. In other words, the netroots thinks that neoliberals are all for the Iraq War, when in fact the Washington Monthly neoliberals were opposed to the Iraq War, but people identify neoliberalism, and Kinsley was opposed to the Iraq War.
I think you're wrong, Mickey. I think you're overestimating the extent to which the netroots really cares about neoliberalism per se. The quote that John gives is of them calling the New Republic's owners neoconservative. That's they are identifying the New Republic with a right-wing neocon foreign policy, but are you saying that's confused? Leave aside the neoliberal identification. Are you saying that
I'd say that they also make the neoliberal identification. They also, I've been attacked as a neoliberal warmonger. I mean, the DLC, in fact, I think did endorse the Iraq War. So, to that extent, the charge is accurate.
Well, he says that the netroots, and am I wrong to think that maybe we should quickly define the netroots? I mean, if you distinguish between kind of political activist blogs and more kind of detached analytical policy wonk blogs, the former on the left are called netroots, but are not on the right for some reason. So,
right.
Sorry. Anyway, go ahead.
But the netroots are blogs like the Daily Kos and Firedog Lake,
MyDD,
and Atrius and MyDD that are activist, democratic, highly partisan bloggers who, as Chait defines it, their stated goal is they want to win.
Mm-hmm. So what do you think of the Chait piece? I mean, how would you characterize his indictment, first of all? You do see it as an indictment of the netroots, right?
I didn't think it was such an indictment. I mean, in fact, Matthew Iglesias and Eric Alterman have commented on it on the New Republic side, and they both see it as an indictment.
Totally.
And, he has a little bit of the the Leon Wiesel Teresh, oh, well, journalists should be objective and pursue truth and blah, blah,
There's definitely
blah, blah.
a little holier than thou going on, and even quotes Leon in the final paragraph.
Right, which rendering it completely incomprehensible. But there's something to that. But I didn't think that was a searing indictment. It was just the last point he made.
Oh, but it's the culminating point. I think there's an air of antagonism throughout his. It's a fairly sober and in many ways clear and good and interesting analysis of the history of the netroots and so on. But there's an undercurrent of antagonism throughout it, I would say. And the culminating point is kind of, these guys are mere propagandists who don't respect truth and who think that ultimately what matters about ideas is not whether they're true, but what effects they have, which is a totally classic, I think, Leon point.
Well, it is true that they are partisans who care more about solidarity to the outside world than they do about, obsessively pursuing internal disagreements, even though they might be true. I think that point is completely fair. But he doesn't say that that's necessarily a bad thing. He points out that the left is aping Grover Norquist on the right, who sort of enforces solidarity at a weekly meeting in Washington, and that Grover has been extremely successful in pursuing his agenda. And I thought there was sort of a respect that Chait gave to left-wingers who want to sort of ape the right-wing machine by creating a left-wing machine.
I must say, I think yours is ultimately not a subtle reading. I mean, Matt Stoller on MyDD did a thing critical of this, and then some of his readers seemed to think that it was, kind of pro-netroots or something. I think he was right in the first place. It was anti-netroots. I think you got at one of the points of, I would make two criticisms of the piece, unless others occur to me in the meanwhile. But the first one would be, the fact that, John says at one point in the piece, quoting Garant's Frank Arruda, who has appeared on Blogging Heads TV.
Memorably.
Yeah. Her saying it is a, quote, category error to think of bloggers associated with the netroots as journalists. Well, yeah, I would agree. I think there is this fundamental division. They are basically political activists, and that's why it's wrong to hold them to the exact standards you would hold journalists to. People on the netroots, when they're not blogging, they're serving as political consultants, basically. That's their line of work.
But it's wrong to pretend that journalists can't be political activists. That's my...
Yeah, but most of them aren't trying. Their day job, is like political consultant or something. The fact that they're using the written word does not mean that they're calling themselves journalists.
Right, but that's fine, and I think that Chait critique was correct.
No, that was not Chait. See, but that's the problem with the piece. On the one hand, he purports to respect that distinction, but on the other hand, his culminating indictment depends on blurring it. He winds up holding them to the standards you would hold journalists to.
Well, but there's something,
He says, we at the New Republic care about truth. Well, fine, you're not political consultants. Of course political consultants are going to be, in some sense, propagandists. That's their line of work. Well, James Carville would get fired if he didn't do that.
Yeah. I'm in favor of caring about the truth. And I think
Mickey,
you're a better activist if you do care about the truth. Let me just make my one point.
Wait, I have to intervene. The point is not... The point is not that they say things that they know are untrue. That, I would agree, is something that no one should do. I don't think he's claiming they do it, and by and large, I don't think they do it. I think he has a subtler definition of propaganda and is accusing them of it without realizing that everyone in their line of work is, in that sense, a propagandist. And I'll give you an example that comes from Blogging Heads. Chris Bowers just is on the site right now as you and I do this.
Right.
And he thought up this Google bomb campaign in the 2006 election, and he ultimately stopped it because of all the bad publicity. But what it was, it seems to me, is something a journalist would not do, but is within the acceptable bounds of a political activist, which is as follows. He tried to, he got people of his ilk to link to negative articles about Republican candidates so that when people Googled the name of those candidates, they would be led to the negative articles. Now, if he did that knowing that there were lies in the negative articles, I would say that was a breach of protocol even in the political activism business. But if all he's trying to do is steer people toward negative information about Republicans that so far as he knows is true, well, that's what political activists do. I mean, that's...
Right. Okay, but first, I'm a guy of the 60s. I prefer a new kind of politics that's more candid. I'm a sucker for candor. I love somebody like Barney Frank, who will admit when there's a fact that goes against him. He gets more credibility by doing that.
He's not a political activist. He's a politician.
Well,
I mean, he's not like a political consultant. He's not a James Carville.
The second thing is that, when Nancy Pelosi took her plane, a request for a plane that the right-wing noise machine characterized as, Princess Pelosi wants a party plane to go to San Francisco, the Netroots responded by saying, it wasn't right for this, that reason. I don't think they were concerned with finding out the truth about Pelosi's plane. They just were looking for talking points they could throw back against the right, and then they assumed that these talking points were correct. I would like to find out what the truth is about Pelosi's plane. So to that extent, I don't trust him, and I think Chait's objection was accurate. What I didn't like about Chait is that he implied that real journalists at the New Republic can't have causes and can't be partisans and can't try to achieve the better world of their dreams. And I just think that to the extent that was the implication of the piece, that's crazy. The New Republic's always been an activist publication.
Well, I got a little of that. I'm not sure he committed that error very egregiously. The one I think he definitely did commit is act as if the New Republic is not in the propaganda business. He says his culminating indictment of the Netroots is, in the Netroots, though, the measure of an idea is its rhetorical effectiveness, not its truth. I direct your attention to a well-known editorial published by the New Republic shortly before the Iraq War, where they did this characterization of people exactly like me who had said that if we had exhausted all other options, then military force might be okay with Saddam, but we hadn't exhausted them because inspectors were in there and they were being allowed to go see any facility they asked to see, which is a fact. And at this point, the New Republic said, referring to exactly that category of people, the mask of nuanced criticism, because we still were against the war, so long as the inspectors were in there and the force could be increased and it could stay indefinitely, and there was no imminent reason not to just keep inspecting, the New Republic wrote, the mask of nuanced criticism has been pulled off the moderate anti-war position, exposing it for the abject pacifism it truly is. Now, Mickey, you know what the word pacifism means, right? And you know it's kind of ludicrous to apply it to people, a lot of whom are in that category, including me, who manifestly had favored wars in the past. Okay, so we weren't pacifists. That doesn't pass the most elementary test for truth. Okay, what that is propaganda. And this sentence in his piece in the Netroots, so the measure of an idea is its rhetorical effectiveness, not its truth. That is a rhetorically effective line. It just isn't true.
I don't think that was the New Republic's finest hour, nor was it in the tradition of activist journalism that I was talking about. That was just BS.
Well, no, but it violates the litmus test posed in John's article for the difference between the high-minded New Republic and all of these scurrilous Netroots people. Now, I should, for the sake of full disclosure, I should say, I emailed John about this, and he said when he wrote that, he was in a hurry, he admitted it wasn't a great choice of words, and so on. So, whatever. He didn't say, I don't know. I mean, maybe he would say in retrospect it wasn't true, but, there's a whole editorial process at the New Republic. There was an editor who reviewed this and so on, and it passed the test.
Chait wrote that editorial.
True.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Not many people do.
But you got him.
Well, I mean, yeah. But I know, look, he says, wasn't it, was bad, I don't know what exactly he said, but he was on deadline, we've all done it. But at the same time, I would say, I feel sure that at the time, he thought, as he was writing it, he thought he didn't think this is false. I don't think he was being intellectually dishonest. I think he thought, this is true. And I'm sure he probably thought that the next day and the day after. But that leads us to another point in this piece where he says of, he quotes Duncan Black, Atrios, and John dismisses Duncan's claim. Duncan writes, lots of people imagine themselves to be somehow above the fray. The most obvious group which does this is journalists and their brethren. They fail to see themselves as actors on the political stage instead of detached observers. And I would submit that John writing that without realizing it's untrue is an example of underestimating the extent to which he was involved in the political drama. He had his feelings. He was not capable of detachment at the moment he wrote that sentence. It's happened to all of us. It happens to me. But I will say that I subscribe to the Duncan Black view of the world, where I admit that detachment is very hard to achieve.
Bob, that's crazy. He was writing an editorial. When you write an editorial, you think you're a political actor. The whole reason people go to work for the New Republic is because they think they're political actors. Chait was not thinking of himself as detached when he wrote that. That whole Netroots criticism, as applied to the Washington Post, may be accurate. As applied to the New Republic, it's insane. They all think they're activists.
Well,
That's
take
what
up
they're
the
in the
argument with
business
John,
for.
because as I see him criticizing this Duncan Black thing, where Duncan says journalists think of themselves as detached observers, I see John as taking issue with this. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I care more about the Netroots than about John Chait and whether his article is accurate.
Well, I must say I do have this burning grievance because there was a byline piece he wrote before the war, when I forget what he said, but he was dismissive in roughly as contemptuous a fashion of people like me who had really thought things through and opposed the war, and was just dismissive of the possibility that we were to be taken seriously. And I'm sure that's what drives me.
Well, Bob, I think you're calling out Jonathan Chait here. I think you and he have to have a debate. The gauntlet's been thrown down.
I'm totally fine with that.
Anyway, I have 4 points. This is like Charlie Rose. If you read the transcript, it would be Bob, 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 Nicky, Bob, 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 Bob. Okay, you're doing all the talking. Let me make some quick points. Chait ignores the financial incentives that pull bloggers to take one side or the other. I don't think there's that much of a distinction between what he calls the wonkosphere of Joshua Micah Marshall and the more partisan Netroots sphere of the Daily Kos, because Marshall only makes money these days to the extent to which he is partisan and on one side. There's no money to be made in the center. If you look at Marshall's blog, as soon as the money came in from blog ads, he became much, much more partisan. Before, he was sort of a neoliberal. He was very receptive to Kenneth Pollock's views on why we should have a war with Iraq. And since then, he hasn't done anything dishonest, but he constantly hits on the partisan issues because that's where the money is.
Yeah, I was surprised to see John in the piece categorize Josh as in the blogosphere rather than the Netroots. But go ahead.
I mean, I think Marshall, he's not dishonest, but he definitely emphasizes the partisan, and everybody does to the extent to which that's where the financial incentives go. Second, it's very interesting that the Netroots are partisan, but it's not all clear what their goals are beyond ending the Iraq War. In other words, there's a lot of wiggle room there. Are they for or against immigration? Are they for or against unions? What's their position on all sorts of old democratic issues? Even affirmative action. I'm not sure Netrootsy people care all that much about affirmative action. So there's a big question mark there that leads people like me to have grounds for hope that if these people ever get into power, it's not going to be the triumph of paleoliberalism. It's going to be a bunch of people who are reformers and we don't really know and are basically progressive, but we don't really know where they stand. That's why I thought it was interesting that Thomas Edsel has now gone to work for the Huffington Post, where he will direct the political coverage. It seems to me, he could talk these Netroots people into being a lot more conservative than you would think, because nobody really knows what they stand for aside from that they hate the war and Bush.
Yeah. Can I say two things?
Yes.
One of them is that, notwithstanding my criticism of John, he's a friend of mine, and not a bad basketball player. I recall that from my youth, actually. But,
he was a friend of yours.
What's that?
He was a friend of yours.
Well, that'll be up to him. But The other thing is, I mean, it's funny you should say that the netroots actually lack specificity. We don't know who in their ideal world would be calling the shots policy-wise. Actually, today on my DD, Matt Stoller had an item about, was concerned about John Edwards' foreign policy in terms of, what kinds of things Edwards had said, who he was lauding Michael O'Hanlon of the Brookings Institute. That's another little gripe I have about John's piece, comparing, well, anyway, I won't get into that. But but he did actually list two people that he thinks he would like to see move into an Edwards or some other Democrats advisory structure. So he actually had the names, and that's today. And so that I think defies your particular criticism. By the way, both the people he mentioned have been on Blogging Heads TV.
Who are they?
Well, Steve Clemens and Anatole Levin, and I got some bad news for him about Anatole, which is that if it's going to be the kind of foreign policy advisor that's going on TV much, he can't have a British accent, okay? I mean, it's not as bad as French, but...
Those are both foreign policy advisors. I concede that we know what the netroots think about foreign policy.
Well, do we, though?
We know what they think about the Iraq War.
Well, right, but this is a little beyond that. I mean, choosing the advisors, these people all have positions on what they would do now in all across the world. So it's not just that they're against the Iraq War.
Well, I don't see where it contradicts the idea that there's this vagueness at the core of the netroots' political philosophy that Matt Stoller thinks Steve Clemens should advise John Edwards. I mean, that doesn't fill in a whole swath of political philosophy for me.
Well, I think you're being pretty specific when you say I would like this person's views on foreign policy implemented as policy, and they've written whole books about it. That's specific.
You're also assuming that Matt Stoller represents the whole netroots.
Well, it's just one example that seemed contrary to what you said.
Yeah.
No sense,
The other thing I want to mention is that, there's a point on Real Clear Politics that, Richardson, Governor Richardson of New Mexico, is playing on this vagueness because he's gone hard left on Iraq, but on everything else, he's sort of pretty far, he's drifting toward the center. And if he can capture the net, he's playing on this lacuna, this question mark, because he's basically going for the net roots on the one thing that they know about, which is Iraq, and then he's assuming he's going to get them and be able to go right on all sorts of other issues. And it'll be very interesting to see if he gets away with that.
Yeah, I mean, David Brooks wrote a column extolling him not long ago, and that suggests to me that, I'm sure they've talked, and that suggests to me that his foreign policy would not exactly be far left.
Although he's gone really hard left on Iraq.
Well, it's easy to say Iraq was a horrible mistake and say it 100 times at high volume. That says nothing.
That he's called for an immediate pullout by the end of this year. The only soldiers left will be the ones guarding the U.S. Embassy. He's gone harder left on Iraq than any other candidate.
Okay, that's also kind of a safe thing to say, but anyway.
No, it's all safe, but it's hard left.
Yeah,
it's totally safe.
Yeah, it's not a guide to what he would actually, do beyond. But okay.
The other thing is that they're very the meme on the netroots that drives me crazy is this idea that all neoliberals are in it only for their self-interest to show how tough they are and get ahead in the world by proving their moderate credentials and attacking the left. There's always this search for like a selfish motive, as if you can't oppose unions because you think unions destroyed American industry, as if you can't oppose welfare because you thought welfare was subsidizing the greatest social disaster in American, in contemporary America, which is the growth of the underclass. That none of those positions can be sincere. You're only taking them because you want to get in with the on the Washington cocktail party circuit by proving you're a moderate. And I get that. You got that from Ezra Klein in his interview with Charlie Peters. Is neoliberals are just. I have it here. You show honesty by attacking Democrats. You show independence by attacking liberals. It's never sincere. It's always showing. And I think they're talking about Joe Klein. I don't think they're talking about neoliberals as a whole.
In your case, I think it's all too sincere sometimes. But but I agree. I personally, think that in some of the Netroots, and it's actually a very diverse thing, but some of the Netroots blogs, you definitely see more in the way of questioning motivations and ad hominem attacks than I think is even productive, really, from their point of view. I don't see that that's really essential to keep their troops in line. Maybe it is, but
and I hit on the secret for why they make this mistake.
What's that?
I think I've hit on the secret for why they make this mistake.
I had assumed it was to rally the troops. Why do you think it is?
No, it's because they're too young. It's a generational thing. They don't realize that the critique of liberalism preceded, for people of my generation, precedes fealty to liberalism. In other words, if you're in the new left, what they ignore is the new left. If you're in the new left, you grew up hating liberals. And you hated the bureaucratic welfare state, and you hated, they were the enemy. So it's not, that's the first loyalty of people in my generation. It was to radical leftism where Democratic Lyndon Johnson liberals were the enemy. They started the Vietnam War. They had this enervating welfare state. They had this huge bureaucracy. They just doled out money to various interest groups. It was the end of liberalism, as Theodore Lowy said. And so when people attack liberals, they're not cynically abandoning their true beliefs. They are prosecuting their true beliefs, which are true left-wing SDS beliefs.
Mickey, I got a great idea. If it is a generational thing, if the problem is that these are just young whippersnappers, you should debate one of them on Blogging Heads TV. I'm about to pull a name out of a hat. Ezra Klein.
This is a case where you can't even be honest on Blogging Heads TV. I was honest with you about what I thought about Ezra Klein. It's gotten me in nothing but trouble. So we're going to have a carapace of falsity.
A carapace? Is that how you pronounce that word?
Ezra Klein is a fine American. We welcome him to the Blogging Heads community. We'll try to find time on our busy schedule, but I don't think we're going to find it.
Carapace.
How about that?
Yeah, no, you're the place to go for those $5 words. We should probably move on to something else.
Yeah.
Where are we? Oh, well, Iraq. You were going to say a couple of things about Iraq quickly. Did you have time to see the Eli Lake?
I saw the Eli Lake
from
thing,
Baghdad?
and that was a real coup. I ignored it at the time. I should link to it. To have a Blogging Heads guy from the Green Zone.
Yeah.
Wearing a flak jacket.
Global media juggernaut, man.
He even looked green.
Yeah, we did. That was we worked a long time on that effect. Yeah.
I have. Well, the interesting question is, in general, the posture of the debate is sort of see you in September. I thought what Eli Lake said about General Petraeus was very interesting. At the end of the summer, General Petraeus will tell us whether the surge is succeeding or not, and everything sort of hinges on that. The big question now is whether the relative success in Anbar province translates at all into Baghdad. If you look at Iraq, the model, he says that something like the Anbar Salvation Council, which is what turned on Al-Qaeda in Anbar, they're trying to form it in one of the Sunni districts in Baghdad. Hard to believe it'll be the same, because the problem in Baghdad is that they're being attacked by Shiites. But it's interesting that they're even trying. And there is a connection to the extent that if the Sunnis from Anbar stop blowing up Shiites in Baghdad, maybe the Shiite reprisals against the Sunnis in Baghdad will be less severe, or the popular support for them will be less strong, and so it might exercise a calming effect in that way.
Oh, I definitely think so. I think supposedly these tribal leaders in Anbar have really started to turn, at least some of them have really started to turn on the jihadists who've been using Anbar, I guess, as a base. Well, if Anbar ceases to be a secure base for these guys, I would think that's going to really compromise their ability to go into Baghdad and do stuff. It's not like they have big bases in Baghdad, as I understand it.
No, but according to Eli, they have bases in Iran.
Well, it's funny. That's not what I heard Petraeus saying when I heard him interviewed on Charlie Rose after the Eli thing. Petraeus said that that weapons being used by Shiites were coming from Iran, that the suicide bombers he depicted as coming through Syria. He wasn't saying the government was what could necessarily that the Syrian government could be expected to police that border, but he did think the Syrian government, if it were determined, could stop these guys from flying into whatever it is, Syria International Airport, from the outside world. These guys who are suicide bombers. And Petraeus made it sound like the suicide bombers, and especially with the surge in effect, it's the suicide bombers that seem to be the gravest threat. Petraeus said they're coming through Syria. And I would think that they go into like Anbar, but I really don't know. I had certainly envisioned the major bases from which these guys are deployed as being in Anbar, wherever they come from.
Are the suicide belt factories and the car bomb factories in Anbar? I'm not so sure.
You mean the factories that put these people in the frame of mind to kill themselves?
No, the factories that actually put the explosives together. It seems to me they could be in Iran, but maybe I'm wrong.
They could be, but given the fact that fertilizer will do the job, truck full of fertilizer will do the job, I don't know that our main hope is in stopping that. I don't know.
But this is but it does make you sort of realize the good side of tribalism. I thought that was one of the lessons of Anbar. I mean, here we've gone into a tribal society and we've imposed democracy, and democracy has allowed all sorts of cross-tribal groups like Shiite sects to form, whereas before they would have had to work through the tribes, and it would have been a much more stable structure. And we've sort of created a sort of fractious, unstable, modern society where before tribal loyalties might have actually been better for the people in that society because the tribal chiefs have to actually deliver the goods. Does that make any sense at all?
I actually lost you for a second there on the audio, so...
Okay. I'm saying that I said that it makes you sort of realize the good side of tribalism, which is, we've gone in and we have a democracy and every individual votes, and the individuals have wound up voting not for their tribes but for their religious sects. And I think what the neocons were counting on, and this gets to your piece about the neocon paradox, you said, well, how could they have expected anything democratic to turn out being favorable to the United States? I think they were counting on tribalism. I think they thought that even though they were imposing democracy, that the tribalism would hold. It would hold the religious splits in check. That yes, that the people were members of their tribe first, and Shiites versus Sunnis second, and that tribalism would allow some leader like Chalabi to emerge as a leader because he would have the loyalty of enough tribal chieftains. It turns out that the tribes weren't strong enough, and democracy allowed the creation of all these crazy new, sects that have resulted in the place being plunged into chaos.
Well,
that was the missing link of your neocon paradox thing was tribes.
I'm not sure I understand it as a critique of the piece. I mean, what I said in the piece was, look, the neocon plan was go in. I mean, the ostensible plan, if they meant what they were saying, go in, use this, turn this place into a democracy. Clearly, another part of their plan was use it as a platform from which to project military force. And I said, given the fact that we are perceived as Israel's major ally in that part of the world, and Israel is not on their top 10 list of favorite countries, and given the fact that among the countries we would be intimidating from Iraq, in their view on behalf of Israel, would be Iran, Shiite Iran, what are the chances that this majority Shiite country, once democratic, would really applaud that behavior? And I said the chances are so low that it was delusional to imagine it happening. I'm not clear on the tribal scenario that would change that.
Well, I talk with an actual neocon, okay? I have trouble understanding what the neocons thought they were up to, too, okay? Part of it is that they thought that a secular, some sort of secular strongman like Ataturk could emerge in Iraq who would sort of modernize Islam. That was certainly part of the dream. Fuad Ajami has said as much. The other part, this my one neocon friend said, is I guess the tribes weren't as strong as we thought they were. I guess, so they were counting on tribal loyalties, I think, to temper democracy and produce a situation where some sort of friend of the United States could emerge, despite the fact that he was a friend of the United States.
I think
and we'd have a situation more like Qatar
I think what you're really saying is that the stuff about democracy was bullshit. They didn't believe it, and they were just saying it. You may be right. That what they really wanted to do was install a puppet regime, and they thought it would work. But see, I think they thought they could finesse it. It would be democratic and yet a puppet regime. Well, that is a tough thing to finesse. But my own view is, even if they had tried to install an old-fashioned puppet regime, it just would not have worked. There would have been enough grassroots resentment that they would have had a terrorism problem on their hands in no time. But it's an interesting question what they were actually thinking, and I'm sure different ones were thinking different things.
So, what else do we have to talk about?
Well, let me quickly say about Iraq. I think the success in Anbar is being touted by conservatives now, the fact that the tribes seem to be turning against the jihadists. This may flip against them before too long, because people will say, well, look, if the Iraqis have turned against the jihadists, why do we need to stay there? Because one of the main arguments for staying there is we need to make sure there will not be a big terrorist base, like what they had in Afghanistan before that war, in Iraq. Well, if the Iraqis tell them to get lost, they'll have to get lost. You cannot be a bunch of people who have an accent, who from a foreign country, and if the natives don't want you there, stay there. They'll be purged. They'll be gone, and so the question will arise: why do Americans have to stick around and help them do the job?
Well, I agree that it'll turn against the pro-war people, and your hero Chuck Hagel has already tried to do that. I think. Has he? You may be.
He's not my hero.
You may be. You may be giving him a more coherent position than he actually takes, but I think he did cite the progress in Anbar as sign that they don't want Al Qaeda around, so we don't have to worry about it becoming an Al Qaeda base. But what about Baghdad turning into like a Beirut-like center of terrorism? It's very easy to be a terrorist hiding in an urban place. Where there are a lot of foreigners, and they can't kick you out just because you have a foreign accent, and they don't go around killing people anyway. Why isn't that a danger?
Well, I assume the argument would be nothing would be better for somebody trying to recruit terrorists to deploy in Baghdad than the presence of American troops in Baghdad, and I suspect that's true.
But we're talking about if American troops leave Baghdad, might that become the base of operations for terrorists?
Well, yeah, but the question is compared to what? And the suggestion I'm imagining the counter to what you asked. What would you say to that? I imagine the answer would be, so long as American troops are there, you'll have a worse terrorism problem than you would otherwise. But
that's not very persuasive, because as long as American troops are there, it's pretty hard for them to operate and to plan to blow up airliners and crash them into buildings in the United States. They're too worried about surviving in Baghdad.
Well, yeah, assuming that the only terrorists in the world who want to do that are in Baghdad, and we're keeping them, pinned down. But, the other argument is the longer America can be depicted as, the oppressor of Muslims, which is the way some people use this kind of footage to depict this, then the more people all around the world are going to want to be working on flying airliners into buildings.
Yeah. Well, I agree that the argument for staying in Iraq is not that is less that it will become a base for Al Qaeda now, and more the moral argument that we were there, we messed it up, and now we have to stop these people we've riled up from slaughtering each other. It's like Darfur. We don't want sectarian violence to kill hundreds of people, to hundreds of thousands of people, and the surge is the only thing that's stopping that, we think. If I were convinced, and it's certainly possible that the American troops were causing more problems than they're solving, well, get the heck out of there. But I'm not quite convinced of that yet.
No, I agree. At this point, I say wait a few months and see what happens. But
it's a moral argument, and Bush and Hagel both completely misstate it by trying to present it in terms of American self-interest. Bush says, if we don't stay there, they're going to come follow us home. Well, I don't buy that. I don't think people buy that. The reason to stay there is to save their lives, not to save our lives. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with Hagel. Hagel says, We have to get out because our boys are being killed. Well, what about the hundreds of thousands of them who'll be killed when we leave? That's the problem. Obviously, if we wanted to save American lives, we'd get out. If all we cared about was saving the lives of people who are American citizens. But that can't be all we care about if we're at all moral people, because we can't just go make a mess and then leave.
I agree. You incur a moral obligation when you invade a country, and I think most of the people favoring withdrawal agree with that and say that things would actually improve if we withdraw. I'm not clear on that yet.
Hegel does not seem to accept this moral obligation. He wants to get out because it'll help the Republicans in the 2008 elections.
Well, that's not the only reason he gives, Mickey.
That's the reason that he gave to Robert Novak, or the reason that Robert Novak chose to put in his column.
There's no contradiction in saying, A, this will be bad for America, and B, championing it will be bad for Republicans. Politicians do that all the time. There's no contradiction, and he has definitely said it will be bad for America.
Right, but what about it'll be bad for Iraq?
I don't think it's his position that it would help the Iraqis for us to stay, but I don't know. I don't know.
I think he's...
If you're going to level that critique against him, maybe you want to do a little more Googling.
Fair enough. I accept that criticism.
That's the kind of person you are.
There's this...
You wanted to talk about this Ed Luttwak piece. How does he pronounce his name?
Luttwak. I just thought it was interesting. He was arguing for benign neglect of the Middle East.
Well, he was and he wasn't. There was a paragraph saying it would be okay to bomb Iran. That's why my question, what is... I don't know. I should have gone to Wikipedia. What is his official ideology, if he has one? How is he categorized?
People always thought that he was a Likudnik. There were even rumors, probably untrue, that he was a member of the Mossad, but which I doubt. But
well, I always assumed just because he was one of these people who would kind of show up at the New Republic sometimes, and most of the people on the foreign policy side of that crew, well, some of them could be fairly characterized as neocons. So I kind of thought that. I never even spoke to him, I think, but he would show up. And but then you read this piece, and he sounds pretty much like a right-wing realist, right? But then you reflect on it and you think, yeah, but the policy prescriptions that could grow out of what he's talking about, some of them would sit well with the neocons, like bombing Iran, right?
Well, I think he's idiosyncratic and quirky, and you can't pigeonhole him. But basically, I thought it was interesting that a pro-Israel writer would abandon the sort of muscular view that the Middle East is crucial and we have to intervene there and rearrange the chessboard and really fix up the Middle East with our military power, would retreat to another position, which is, hey, we should really just leave the Middle East alone. It's not all that important. Don't worry about it. And that this too is sort of a fallback position that would let Israel do whatever it's doing. It would let them bomb Iran. It would. It dovetails with what I take to be the view of some people, and I put Marty Peretz in this camp, which is they're not all that uncomfortable with the Israel-Palestine dispute going on for generations and centuries. It's a fight. They've always fought. Not that many people are killed. We just keep on fighting.
Well, here is...
and I thought it was interesting that there's this... position of retreat, that's all.
Well, see, the thing that reading this made me realize there's one thing that kind of neocons share with what I would call unreconstructed realists. That is a kind of old-fashioned pre-9/11 realists, people who would have called themselves foreign policy realists, which is they really... ultimately, they put a lot more emphasis on the threats posed by nation-states than the threats posed by non-state actors like terrorists, and they tend to think that to the extent that terrorists can be a real threat, they can only do it with the active support of an actual nation-state. After 9/11, supposedly Paul Wolfowitz could not be convinced that there wasn't a nation like Iraq behind this, because these guys could not have done this on their own. And I think... this is the big mistake of both neocons and kind of unreconstructed, kind of right-of-center realists, is to not realize that, as the years pass by, it grows more and more likely that terrorists will have the capability to exert really lethal force, and that Tel Aviv will go up, with a nuke. And
but you wouldn't think that Luttwak would make that mistake, because he's sort of a military reformer, small is beautiful guy who recognizes the power of asymmetric warfare, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You wouldn't think he would be fixated on large central nation states as the only actors.
Here's a line from his piece. But we live in fortunate times in which we have only the irritant of terrorism instead of world wars to worry about. Well, if they nuke Tel Aviv, I would call that more than an irritation. And I think, enlightened, like Yitzhak Rabin, former Prime Minister of Israel, I think was motivated explicitly by the realization that was where the technology was headed, and you had to try to stop stop the problem before it festered and got more and more dangerous. And I think, realists and neocons do not adequately appreciate the long-term threat posed to interests they hold dear.
And Luttwak wildly underestimates the extent to which the Israeli-Palestinian conflict still, fosters hatred of the West and fosters the kind of terrorism you're talking about. And Matthew Iglesias had a good post on that about arguing that it's the swing voters in the Arab world we worry about. That some people are going to hate the United States because of Britney Spears, but there's a whole bunch who hate us because of Israel, and those people don't necessarily have to hate us.
Let me just say one more line from Luttwak. He's minimizing the importance of the Middle East, and this is the reason we don't have to worry about it. He says, the people in the Middle East, only about 5% of the world's population, are remarkably unproductive, with a high proportion not in the labor force at all. Well, to some of us, not having people in the labor force is what worries us, because you know what young men with time on their hands may do. And that I think gets at
Good point. Now, can I segue into this McCain's advocacy of a League of Democracies?
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. Oh yeah, let's go.
Oh, okay. You attacked the neocons because you said they try to destroy arms control networks that might control the spread of weapons of mass destruction. McCain has come out and endorsed a League of Democracies, which he sees as sort of almost an alternative to the UN. It would take action where the UN failed to act in Darfur. Maybe he obviously has in mind Iran and Iraq, and membership would be restricted to democratic states like us and Britain and France, presumably, right, and Brazil, and any place that's democratic. And you don't like this, but I like it because it is the basis for world government. In other words, if you're going to have a world government that's going to be legitimate to the American people, the other jurisdictions in the world government can't be dictatorships. They have to be actual democracies, so that they elect their leaders, and then those leaders gather at a big hall somewhere, and they form the world government. The UN doesn't provide that basis, because Idi Amin and whatever dictator controls the country controls the vote in the UN. If you restrict it to democracies, you have laid the foundation for an effective world government. Yet when McCain proposes this, you attack him for it. Ha!
I wouldn't say I'm in favor of world government, as with all that connotes to most people. We do need more and more in the way of global governance, certainly on the arms control front. But the first thing I'd say is it has to be global. If there's one country in which biological weapons are being made for deployment in America or something, that's a problem. So, having this organization of democracies, which aren't the problem to begin with by and large on this front, I don't see how exactly that solves the problem. I do share your view that in the long run, a goal of ours has to be to make the whole world consist of free market democracies. The question is, how do you get there? And
why can't it be like GATT? Nations will be clamoring to get in, or like the European Union. They'll be doing whatever is necessary to join this wonderful League of Democracies, including becoming more democratic and less terrorist.
Well, Mickey, look at the incentive structure. If you're saying, we won't let you into the World Trade Organization unless you become democratic, what, China overnight, is going to transform itself? That's nutty. That's crazy. Okay?
Well, no, but
so just if you look at the way the incentive structures work on the ground, that's not going to do the job. What is going to happen if you start this organization of democracies and say to China, you can't get in, and say to Arab countries, you can't get in? they're going to get their backs up and they're going to get resentful, and Muslims all over the world are going to say this is another Western plot against, Arabs and most Muslim states, okay?
Well, presumably there will be a lot of Muslims from the Southeast Asia who will be in it, right?
There would be some, but
democracies there.
What about Arab Muslims who have generated most of the terrorism we worry about? They could rightly say, here's another club that America and Israel can join, and they tell us we, the Arab states, can't join. Okay? So that seems to me a real downer to this plan. The other thing that does is that over on the other side of the hemisphere, China would say, oh, America and Japan can join, we can't join. I don't think we need a suddenly militant, resentful China on our hands right now, personally. But the other thing is, I mean, there is a smart way, I think, to use economics to bring, to help democratize the world, and that is to recognize that getting drawn into markets tends to exert politically liberalizing forces within your country. It's happening in China now, which is much more pluralistic, with much freer expression than it was back when it was an economically communist country. Now listen to McCain on this. You have to ask yourself, okay, so what do the members of this club get? This League of Democracies. And he says, well, this body could provide, quote, unimpeded market access. So he wants to do the opposite, it sounds like. Rather than lure authoritarian regimes into the market economy, confident that will unleash forces within their country that they won't be able to contain, which I think is the case. He wants to deprive them of the very thing that would help move them toward democracy. I just think this is deeply confused, and I side with Matt Iglesias, who said the good news here is, there is a version of this known as the concert of democracies that some kind of liberals, mainly liberal hawks, are fooling around with. And I've been worried that some Democratic presidential candidate would get kind of lured into buying into this, because it sounds like a good soundbite. And there are definitely, aspiring political advisors and aspiring secretaries of state out there talking this up on the Democratic side.
I actually found it in a New Republic editorial they wrote in 1984 after Mondale's lost.
I hope I didn't write it. No, that was too early.
In December '84, they said, what are the good democratic ideas out there? And one of them was this League of Democracies idea.
Well, that was during the Cold War. I mean, that's the interesting point. See, neocons like this idea. Some on the left like it, but for different reasons. The ones on the left think that it would help us do these multilateral humanitarian interventions that we haven't been able to do. I think they're totally wrong about that. Look, if you have a bunch of democracies who want to intervene in Darfur, do it. You don't need a club, just do it. The fact is that the political will doesn't exist, and it won't exist after you create the club. And the intervention would not incur any less resentment from the non-members, if anything more resentment from places like Russia, because we've started this club, okay? But meanwhile, the neocons, what do they like about it? I think a number of things. It puts the fissures right where they seem to want them, okay? Between us and China, between us and the Arab world. It's basically a resurrection of the Cold War, which is a world that, something they kind of like. It's just, people who favor the concert of democracies, the League of Democracies, whether they know it or not, and I think the neocons know it, are championing something that would stand a good chance of basically reviving something like the Cold War.
That's all very persuasive, but I think you're ignoring the perverse dialectical consequences of this organization, which is it would provide the foundation for a world government, which is what the neocons claim not to want. But
Mickey, it absolutely wouldn't, because it would reinforce fissures between basically the two sides during the Cold War. Well, that's half the world that's not on board, Mickey. How do you get a world government out of that?
Well, they get on board because as long as you allow trade, and I agree that McCain is crazy on that, if you allow trade, China, in your theory, will eventually be a democracy, then they join, and then we have a world government.
Well, first of all, as you said, McCain is saying, no, you would restrict, you would deny them economic benefits, so...
Well, forget that part.
That doesn't work. But the other thing is that you will, it is intrinsically alienating. There would be this whole process of deciding, okay, who's a democracy and who's not. And there would be all these borderline cases. We would talk about them, and people would say, yes, there's been liberalization in China, but in the end, and the whole process would just massively alienate these countries, and not just their leaders, but their people. It's just the worst idea that I've ever heard an appreciable number of Democrats subscribe to, I think, with a possible exception of invading. No, it's worse than invading Iraq. That was a less predictable outcome, I think, even though I opposed it.
Why wouldn't this... I'm playing devil's advocate, but why wouldn't it exert a subtle pressure on these borderline cases to become less borderline and more democratic?
Well, again, you have to look at kind of the time frame of the incentive structure. China, if you ask, how could China gracefully get from here to real democracy, that we would respect as democracy? Well, it's not a one-year plan or a two-year plan or a three-year plan. They're not going to make a transition that huge without massive disruption. The question, the process we should try to abet, is them making it over a 10-year, 15-year time frame. Well,
right, but you could see a situation where some authoritarian government schedules an election and they want to call it off because they think it'll be an outcome they don't like, but they don't because then they know that they'll get kicked out of the League of Democracies. The League of Democracies could have a positive effect in encouraging democracy.
In that one case, I don't know. I mean, conceivably in that one weird case where a country is right on the brink or something, meanwhile, you're alienating all these countries that aren't. I just think...
one case happens all the time.
Well, what's the country you're thinking of?
Well, the country I was thinking of was Algeria, which is a bad example because they're arguably, that was the one extreme case where maybe you wouldn't want to have the election.
But see, the other thing is, why would they want to join? Okay? If you make it a prerequisite for economic benefits, sure, you may find that one country on the border that wants to jump. Meanwhile, you're excluding all these countries from the economic engagement that would be good.
Turkey's a good example. They're about to have an election. The military's making noises that they're going to have a coup and not abide by the results of the election. From what I've read, they should have the election. The Islamic Party that's going to win is a relatively is a good vehicle for bringing their Islamic population into the modern world.
Why would they want to join this organization?
Because then they get to vote and veto grandiose neocon plans to invade in other countries.
Oh, you think we'd give Turkey a veto? I mean, if every country has a veto, then the organization is totally paralyzed
well, they at least
anyway.
have a vote. They'd have a vote.
Well, right. But if you just get a vote and there's already 30, 40 members, you're not going to appreciably... I mean, the fact is, this only is going to be a lure if there are real benefits to membership. And what will those benefits be? Well, like economic benefits. As I just argued, it would be a real mistake to start excluding authoritarian regimes from economic benefits.
If being one vote in 40 weren't important, jurisdictions in the U.S. wouldn't care that much about being represented. In fact, if you're one vote in 40, you have more power than that might seem because you can log roll, you can form alliances, you can do all sorts of things that protect the interests that you care most about.
Yeah, but that's because there are a bunch of manifestly momentous decisions being made in that case. Here you're talking about, do we intervene in Darfur? How important is it to Turkey to have one of 40 votes, especially when if they lose the vote, they might have to send troops, which they don't. I mean, this is just... It just doesn't... Well, and the irony is, I'll bet a lot of the neocons who favor this League of Democracies are actually not enthusiastic about letting this Islamist party proceed in these Turkish elections.
That's an interesting point.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've persuaded me.
It was so easy it wasn't fun, Mickey.
Not to champion this idea.
But you have your chance to give me my comeuppance, because you, and this was your idea, not mine, are going to critique.
Well, Mickey's review of Bob.
Okay.
I just have 2 points to make.
First of all, the context, Mickey, believe it or not, some people are not assiduously following my career. I got this month to write 2 pieces a week on the op-ed page of the New York Times. It's now over.
You wrote 8 op-ed pieces, right? Was there more than that?
8, right.
8. You wrote 8 op-ed pieces for the New York Times. A steady progression that took readers from your humble roots on the Presidio in San Francisco to your cosmic vision for the future of human civilization. I thought I thought it was great. Okay, loved it. Doesn't seem to have done all that much for blogging has traffic, but you didn't expect it to.
Oh man, I have an admission to make in that regard. But go ahead.
I just thought you had this piece why Darwinism isn't depressing, where you set out this vision of, we care about our children because of our genes, and if only we can expand the circle of things we care about, so we start caring about other children and we empathize with other people, we sort of have this expanding circle of compassion. And my point is that that's an intrinsically boring idea. If you had a plot for a movie and you said, well, we have this circle and it keeps on expanding, you would say, that's a boring movie, I don't want to watch it.
So in some respects, your characterization of the columns as great would be actually misleading.
Well, no, because then you pulled it out in a later column called Planet of the Apes, where you pointed out that it's a cliffhanger, because, in fact, having this sort of expanded circle that you talk about is the only way we can save our planet from extinction. And there's this Star Trek aspect, which is, why haven't we been visited by space aliens? And the answer is, because they probably have not saved their planets from extinction. They've blown themselves up because they were unable to transcend their genetic limitations. So it becomes this very exciting cliffhanger, and that is, I think, the big dramatic selling point of the Bob Wright worldview. Not that this plodding, incremental, expanding circle of compassion, or the inevitable voyage toward a Teilhard de Chardin sort of cosmic consciousness, which at one point captivated me, and then I decided I don't care about whether 15 generations from now people achieve a Teilhard de Chardin cosmic consciousness, but I do care about whether the planet gets blown up. So I thought you pulled it out.
You've made my day, because I should say, actually, did I already say it wasn't my idea to talk about this? I just want to sound like not self-aggrandizing. Anyway, it wasn't, and I was braced for withering criticism. You've made my day for reasons you may not realize, which is that last column you allude to, Planet of the Apes, I had been haunted by the feeling, and I still think actually I'm right, probably, because I think no one but you would have gotten that connection and seen the last one as resonant. Haunted by the feeling that actually that was a mistake. That the first third, it was a good lead, and it should have gone somewhere totally different than envisioning the apocalypse and how we could avert it. Because I just thought I was covering way too much ground at the end and sounding like a woolly-minded, whatever. I still kind of think that, but I've got to say I will lose a little less sleep over it now that no less harsh a critic than you has said good things about that column.
We like you when you're woolly-minded.
Some do, some don't.
Now, we like the big cosmic, oh my God, is he talking about this in an op-ed quality?
But there had already been a certain amount of that, I think.
But nobody else is going to talk about space aliens.
If not me, who?
On the New York Times op-ed page.
Well, I actually do appreciate that, because it is you don't know this feeling because you're a blogger, so you remember the feeling back when you wrote for like a print magazine, a piece comes out and you think, oh no, this should have been really quite different and would have been much better. Terrible feeling. But when you got a blog, you can add an addendum, you can write a bunch of items to bury the one you don't like, whatever.
No, that gets to one of my other crazy ideas, but we've gone way over.
No, come on.
I went to this, at the book fair, I went to this panel on criticism, okay?
Yeah.
And it was Megan O'Rourke was there. It was all a very intelligent discussion of...
She's got a book of poems out.
Right. She had that too. But it all assumes that there's this static work of art that then gets criticized, okay? But the work of art stays static. Why should it stay static in this day and age? Why can't you write a novel, bloggers and everybody critiques it, and then you go back and change the novel and make it better? Why can't you have a play and readers and people critique it, maybe on your website, and you go and change the play? The way you change a blog. I do it all the time. A reader sends a criticism, I go and change it. Why does the work of art have to be static? Why can't we enter an age where if you, Bob Wright, write an op-ed piece and you think it should have gone a different direction, you take it in a different direction and you post the new one?
Well, I can do that, and I could. I think a lot of that happens in scholarship these days. There's much more kind of ongoing feedback before the final version. In the realm of books, the problem with that, I've thought about this, is if you're going to make money writing books, and there's not a lot of philanthropists out there like just trying to shower money on me to write books, so I have to do it in the marketplace, the book itself has to be something people want to buy. If you've circulated the whole thing online and it's gradually gotten better and better, then it's free, and they don't have to pay money for it.
Well, so you have to figure out how to make money online without selling a fixed object like a book. I don't quite know how to do that.
I don't
but
either.
Nobody else does either.
I don't either. Well, I've got this plan. It's this global media juggernaut thing, but which brings us back to the culminating question is whether this Mickey's cookie jar thing is going to fly. We'll let our viewers.
You were gonna confess some horrible mistake you made in terms of driving traffic to Blogging Heads.
Oh, it's just I had already written a few. When you see an op-ed online, it says what the person does in the bottom in the bio. It's never linked to anything. I had written a few of these before it occurred to me and asked, is it possible to link? And turns out it is. So Blogging Heads TV, for the last, 50% of them or something, the reference to Blogging Heads TV in the bio was linked to the site.
And did that make a difference?
Oh, I guess 1,200 was the most we got.
It's not bad.
If you're asking, unfortunately, this was after the one of mine that had done the best on the most emailed list. But if you're wondering how high on the most emailed list does something have to get to send 1,200 people to your site, it was something like 15th. I don't know. What
was your best one on the most emailed list?
Oh, the Easter sermon, predictably.
I forget that one.
We'll link to it, and you'll be able to read it.
Cool. I like the wacky ones.
This had its wacky aspects.
Okay.
But I feel I feel a little self-conscious. Enough about me, Mickey. Let's talk about you. But I'm afraid time has run out, so maybe we'll do this next time.
I agree.
I'd be happy to do it a week from now, but whenever is okay with you.
How about 2 weeks?
Okay.
See you then.
Okay, bye.
Bye.